Hi everyone and welcome back to Scale Studio. Today we're going to be looking at the several iterations of mud and dust effects I attempted on this StuG. If you want to skip ahead to the final iteration, there's a timestamp in the description. Also, I'm doing this video in collaboration with Panzermeister36, so if you want to see his video, the link will also be in the description. I'm actually pretty excited to show you guys my process for applying mud to AFVs, so let's get going. Now, I hardly claim to be an expert on this, but from what I've seen, mud and dust effects are kind of broken up into three stages. First is texturing, then there's pre-dusting, which usually involves an airbrush or dust-colored enamel or aqualine paint, and then finally mud and blending and all that in that one. So that's basically what we're going to do here. We're going to start with texturing, and so the way that I did this is I took a lot of inspiration from Night Shift's Rutscher video where he used real dirt on the fenders, and since the fenders are extremely similar, actually the whole tank is extremely similar to Night Shift's Rutscher, I decided to do a similar effect on this one. Now I added too much dirt. This is the first mistake I made, is I did too much dirt on it. If I had done a little less, I could have done a bit more of a subtle effect and it would have been more realistic. But basically what I did is I applied dry dirt to the fenders, like you can see here, and then took away some of it. Didn't take away enough, obviously. And then at the beginning of this video you saw me mixing up superglue and acetone, and basically it's a super thin version of superglue. What I didn't realize is that that makes the paint lift like nothing else, and so if you're going to do this effect, get a gravel and sand fixer. I really like the one from VMS. They make a really actually nice gravel and sand fixer. I've been using it a little bit in my videos, but basically the thin superglue works the same way. But if you use too much, it will lift the paint. So you apply it over the mud and then let it dry, and the superglue doesn't really preserve the texture of the dirt that we have here very well, but if I was going to use the VMS, which I actually will later in the video, it would have been a better effect overall. So after the disaster with the fenders, Christmas rolled around and I had asked for VMS gravel and sand fixer, so I was able to actually try the different technique with it. As you can see here, I'm actually adding dirt the same way basically, but this time I'm doing a lot less, and I'm going to use the gravel and sand fixer. Sorry, it keeps focusing in and out. This is a new camera, so I'm kind of learning the works with it still. But as you can see, it's a much smaller amount, and then I'm just adding the fixer in right on top. There's not a ton that you have to do with it. It'll dry out completely flat. But as you can see, it just kind of settles over the surface, and you actually get a pretty decent result. Over here you can see the same thing. So I'm gonna add some dirt in, and there was a little bit too much here, I think, but I think the effect wasn't completely lost. So once I added that, I added the fixer, and I'm just using the dropper cap. Night Shift uses a paintbrush, but I don't like ruining my paintbrushes like that, so I've just been using the dropper cap and I haven't really had any problems with it. This was the right amount. This is probably the place that I'm happiest with. I added only a tiny bit in the crevices and then pigment fixed. Now for the lower hole, it didn't need such extreme texturing, so I used Wilder's Texture Earth, and the color doesn't really matter. It's just getting texture onto the model to look like dirt. We're gonna recolor it later, which is the third step, if you guys remember. But the nice thing about Wilder's Textured Earth is that it doesn't dry extremely fast, and so you can work in small sections like this and blend out the edges, and it makes a really actually realistic effect. Once you get color on it, it looks really nice, And because it's so easy to thin with water, you can really do a lot with just one bottle of Wilder's Textured Earth. Not to mention it's way cheaper than anything from Ammo or MIG, even though they're basically the same thing. It's like $5 a bottle instead of 10. So I would definitely recommend getting yourself a bottle of this. It doesn't really matter the color, and work with it. It really works nicely. But as you can see, I'm just applying it around kind of the edges, as I don't think that the center of the panels really would get a ton of mud on them. So I'm just kind of working around the edges and then blending it out before it has a chance to dry. Now, it doesn't look fantastic right now, just because of all the water in it, but once it dries, you'll see that the aggregate in it really pops and makes a good effect. So even if it doesn't look fantastic when it's wet, give it 24 hours and you'll see that it actually turns out really nicely. It's hard to mess this up. So far so good, right? Not anymore. So I decided to use Wilder's Aqualine Light Mud for this next effect, and by itself it's actually a really nice product. If you're careful with it and don't apply too much, it looks really good. The problem is I applied too much and too thick. The secret to this color of this product, I haven't really been able to use any of the other colors, is that you want it really thin so it's just a dust coat. And so far I kind of had that idea, but I got a little bit impatient and did too much at once. But as you can see, I'm just applying it over the dirty areas. And this so far is a very solid technique. Up to here, it's pretty good. You can do this with no really bad effects. Actually, I recommend doing this. But after this, I kind of start making mistakes. So the way that Aqualine works and blends out really nicely is if you leave it for 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how humid your area is. I live in Nevada, so it's not very humid and I can blend it within 30 minutes. Someone who lived in a more humid area like maybe Florida or Tennessee, they're going to need a little bit longer. But that's besides the point. Just let it dry and then you can blend it out with a brush that has just a tiny bit of water on it. And as you can see, the really thin part that's been blended out actually looks really nice, and looks like dirt and dust. So far, I'm doing okay. However, this is not the final look. Of course, it wouldn't be. I decided to try enamel paints, and I wasn't able to get the right colors, so I settled for tan and like a deep brown, and these turned out so badly. I'm kind of embarrassed to watch this over again, but it looks like skin, almost skin color, and this is the part where I'd say don't follow what I did. Unless you have a really good dust and mud color, don't do this. This was a mistake. The dust layer looked fine, but this was supposed to be my dry mud, which it looks nothing like. But if you have the right color, the technique's kind of the same. You're gonna want to blend it out after it's dry, and then just keep putting more layers of color on. As you can see, I was really trying to resurrect this, but it wasn't happening. So far, kind of a flop. Once that was blended, I remembered that I needed to put some like grass and sticks on the fenders to make it look really realistic. Now, I decided to do this afterward, which was a big mistake. I should have done it with the original dirt and then used the fixer to put all of them, or to fix all of them down to the model. Instead, I decided to try it with PVA, and this was just bad all around, and I shouldn't have tried it. But for those watching, if you're ever doing this, make sure to fix the sticks and stuff with the original pigment fixer so that it's kind of inside of the dirt and rubble, so it just sticks much better and doesn't fall apart when you put more effects on it. Now, this is another darker coat of that kind of same enamel paint. I think I just added black to it, this was a huge mistake. But the theory's kind of there. You put on increasingly smaller layers of color to get the result you want. Now, the second time I tried to do Night Shift's pre-dusting method with kind of a Tamiya flat earth slash buff mixture, and this actually started out promising. It was a little dark, but this could have been a good way to do it. However, the problem is that it was too dark, and so it looked kind of like mud, but there was no texture behind it because it was an airbrush, so I wasn't able to control it very well. This again was a mistake. It should have been a little bit lighter, so it looked like it was dirt, or like super thin dust, which doesn't have any texture. After the first layer, I made a slightly darker one, which was just pure flat earth, and used it as a darker mud, like real mud layer. And actually, if I hadn't bought the kit that you're going to see next, this would have been fine. I think I actually would have still made the video and said this is okay, but not fantastic. If you guys want to try it, go ahead. But as you can see, I'm kind of just putting it inside of the pre-dusted effect, so that there's a little bit of like a wetter section that took longer to dry because it was a thicker amount of mud there. Now, after this, I kind of got fed up, and this is when I actually hit my stride. I decided to use some actual products for weathering, and this made my life so much easier. I'm sorry to say that the homemade mud mixes really don't stand up to this at all. So to start off, I actually did the same thing with the Aqualine, except it was way thinner so I could make a really nice dust effect, but it was applied around on top of all the texturing that we've done before. And I actually did this right over top of the other effects we did. It didn't really matter that much because they had dried for a while, because I had given up on the model a little bit. And so now I was able to kind of just paint right back over them without any ill effects. I also textured the top, or added dust to the top of the casemate. Now, this is a little extreme, but I think it gets the point across. If the crewman or a mechanic was to walk over it with muddy boots, it would kind of dry out like this, being wiped away from the central areas and kind of sticking around in crevices where there might be a better hold because dirt was actually between the panel lines. And I kind of just did this over everything that I thought deserved a little bit of dust, and it made sense to have some. After that, I just kind of blended it off with the same technique I described earlier. Up here, I tried to do a bit of a rain marks effect, and that did not turn out the way that I wanted it to. It kind of just all blended together, so I'm gonna have to practice that a little more before I say do this, because it's actually a good technique. But you can probably see that it's just kind of blending it all out and making a really more subtle effect than it looks like at first. I like to kind of reactivate Aquiline halfway through its dry and then spread it out a little thinner. This helps with blending in the final step. You don't have to, this is kind of just my preference. But you can see I kind of don't finish the blending and leave it super thin, and this helps make a really nice soft gradient. Then, once it's dry, I can actually start blending it, and you can see that a lot of the effect kind of goes away, but there's still a kind of an idea that there is dust on top of the casemate. So I think that's actually a pretty good way to do that. No, I kind of cheated here because I started using AK's Earth Effects washes. They're actually considered washes, which is why you need to texture before you use them. But this is basically like using the normal enamel paints that we used before. Don't cover all of the pre-dusting, but cover most of it so it doesn't look overwhelming. After that, you can blend it out. But as you can see, that was the dry earth, and then I'm adding a little bit of a dark earth, which simulates like wet mud that's not completely wet, so it's not got a sheen on it anymore. Sorry about my fingers. I was trying a different camera position, and it seems that my hand likes to be in that position more than the camera does. But you can see that I'm kind of biasing it towards the thickest parts of the mud, and that's going to really make a convincing effect. Finally, we use the satin mud, which has a satin finish, and it looks like fresh mud. Just in little spots, I didn't use a ton because it tends to overpower everything. Once that was all done, I actually blended it with enamel thinner. I didn't blend it beforehand because I feel like it makes a more cohesive effect if you blend all three colors at once. For the underside of the hull, I decided to skip any pre-dusting and actually went straight for the Earth Effects wash. And this actually turned out pretty nice because it's supposed to be a little bit darker under the hull, and as you can see, the colors on the tank in the mud kind of go from dark to light. The underside of the hull should be the darkest, while the top of the casemate is super super light, just the dust effect. So down here, I actually skipped any dust effects and went straight for the mud. And it's a little bit more realistic because there's shade, and so it wouldn't have direct contact with sunlight and would dry a little bit slower. But as you can see, I'm literally just covering all of the work that we've done before, just making sure to hit all of that textured mud. Then same way, I added a little bit of dark mud, not a ton, just around the top edges, where it would be most shaded and wouldn't dry out very fast. And the same with the fresh mud, just making sure that it doesn't overpower anything and make the whole thing look wet. Once that's done, we can do my favorite part of it, which is blending out all of the mud effects, because this makes it look really cohesive and actually super realistic. This is when you're like, oh yeah, okay, now it looks like the tank got super muddy. Beforehand, it's kind of hard to see, but now you can see that it's kind of like actually working with the tank and actually looking really decent. After that, I wanted to add some more streaking to the lower hole, so I kind of just drew lines of the wash and then blended it out, except my camera died right here, so you missed most of it, but you can kind of see what I'm going for with just a blended down look. After that, I did a bit of a darker color to add some variation to the streaks, like some of them hadn't dried yet, and then blended that down as well. The process is the same for some more fresh mud, and this really kind of just drew the effect together and made the underside of the tank actually really interesting. After that, I did some speckling with all three colors, and actually I think this turned out way better than what I was doing before, because they're actually nicely thinned already. Thinking back, I'm probably going to have to blend out some of those specks, but I was pretty happy with the way it turned out. But actually, that's all for today. I hope you found these techniques helpful, or at least entertaining to watch. If so, please leave a like down below and comment. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so, because I'm going to try to get back to a more normal and regular schedule for releasing. And if you liked what I did, you'll get more of it in your feed. If you want to support me on Patreon, my link will be in the description. Thank you to the 4 people who are currently supporting me. You guys are fantastic. But I think that's it. If you guys do want to check out Panzermeister's video, or if you're coming from his, let me know in the comments, or go check out his link in the description and on screen now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.